Okay, well, my name's Peter Gong. I'm a member of the Squamish Nation in Vancouver. I was born in Mission and raised on a little reserve called Wannock Reserve Number 1 in Maple Ridge, and it's right on the border between Mission and Maple Ridge. And I'm a direct descendant of the Wannock people who lived on the Stave River. I now do art full-time for a living. 2008, I connected with a nephew who was working on some projects here in Mission, a house pole, and then some welcome figures for BC Hydro during the 2010 Olympics. And I took 3 little knives that I'd made with my uncle in the 60s, and I sat with them, and that kind of rekindled my interest in the art. But I was still working full-time. Well, originally, I didn't know anything. I was introduced to what we call West Coast Native art in the 60s with my uncle, who he learned in prison because he had addiction issues. And he was the one who taught me how to make knives and introduced me to the art. And back then, they didn't even have a term for it. So it was just native art, native curiosity art. And didn't really bring in a lot of money for him, but he worked hard at it. What I find when I'm mostly what I consider myself more than anything is a mass carver, because that's basically most of the carving I did was carve masks. And a lot of my carving techniques, I mentored with a couple artists. I watched them do what the artists do. I watched how they used their tools. And but for me, when I started putting my knife to wood, it was mostly intuition. You have to be able to visualize what you want to carve, and if you can't see it, you can't carve it. What I've found since then, from learning from other artists, is the most important thing to do is to learn how to draw. That's your basic foundation for most modern art of any kind. If you can't draw it, you can't do anything with it. And the more you draw, the better your carvings will be. I was just told that by Dempsey Bob when I was in Terrace. Well, Sean Hinton he couldn't really trace his lineage, but he thought he had indigenous ancestry. But from him, I learned how to block out pieces, how to remove the initial stock to start carving a mask. And being at the beginning steps of carving a mask, it's very important to learn how to do that. So he was very informative for me getting started doing that. And Tom was a much more accomplished artist than Sean, and spent a lifetime working with older artists and training with older artists when he was young. So from him, I learned how to design, and up until 2009, I'd never even picked up a paintbrush, and I didn't draw. So I was missing some very fundamental skills when it comes to doing art. You got to be able to draw, and so I had to learn how to draw as well. I find that most artists are influenced by the things around them and other artists that they're working with. So I've met a lot of artists in my short career, mostly through the bent wood boxes that I make. But when you come into contact with other artists, they can influence you a lot in how you do your art. Even though I'm Coast Salish, I was always driven to understand form line. That's the term they use nowadays for Northern art. And spent a lot of energy and time learning about it and how to draw it and the basic principles that apply to designing with form line. And I've sought mentorship from at least 4 or 5 different artists. Arlene Ness up in Terrace, Mike D'Angeli, who's Nishka, but he lives in Victoria now. My mentor, Tom Pattison, and it just goes on and on. Anytime you run into another artist and you're having issues, it's a natural process to try and get some input. And most artists are natural teachers anyway, so if they see you're working on something, they'll want to come up and take an interest and maybe give you some input. When I was 5 or 6, where I grew up on the Wannock Reserve, some of my mother's cousins were carving, I think it was at least a 10 or 11 man racing canoe down by the river. And you know, just a random log that floated down the river. Back in the 60s, there was lots of that stuff, so you could just grab it. And so he grabbed it and dragged it up, and he was in the process of doing a dugout canoe. And the night before he was going to put it in the water, some people came and stole it. So that was very disappointing. We never even got to see it go in the water. I had a fiberglass canoe that a friend of mine built, but I made some of my own paddles. I have a gray paddle up there that's really weathered, and that was given to my, we called him uncle, but he wasn't really family. My uncle, Jim Flardo from Kwantlen, and in the 60s he went into North Vancouver to visit family, and the canoe people, whoever they were at the time, took him out in the canoe, and he was named honorary chief, and they gave him this paddle in the 60s, and I still have it. When I was 14 or 15, when I got my first fiberglass canoe, I went to my Uncle Jim. I said, Jim, you got any paddles? We want to go canoeing. And so he gave it to me, and I've used it all these years, and I've used this actually as a model to make working canoes. I now do paddles for art, but I don't use this as a template because it's a real paddle. And when you do an art on a paddle, normally you want a nice big canvas to do it on. It just shows up a lot better. So art paddles are not real paddles, they're just for art. My mentor, George Pena, he was a Coast Salish artist. He studied arts at Arabian as well as Tom Pattison with Tony Hunt Sr., with a lot of the old time carvers still working at that time in the 70s. He said those Squamish artists really got a lock on those panel carvings. He said they're so good at it. So a lot of Squamish artists out there, it's amazing art. We all do variations of, you know, different directions. Some of us carve panels, some of us carve masts, some of us make canoes, right? So the variety is out there. Everybody does something different, and we're still artists. It doesn't matter if we carve a $10,000 mask or a $150 panel that's going to go on a wall somewhere. Now, I worked at that spindle where I was an apprentice to George Pena. That was his project, but I did 99% of the work. That's just the way it goes when you're an apprentice, and I was quite happy to do it because they were paying me good money. If you just keep working at things, sooner or later you develop your own style. You know, when you're working with people and they're mentoring you, quite often follow the style of work that they do. And then as you get better and you go out on your own, you expand on what you've learned. But you always carry some influences from the people you worked with and that taught you. Well, I spent a career working in the forest industry, specifically cedar mills, shake and shingle mills, lumber mills, and I spent the last 20 years as a head shipper in a lumber mill. In 2009, when the mill shut down, and I decided that I didn't need a payroll number anymore, that I kind of fell into volunteering on my nephew's projects and taking the few tools and then rekindling my interest in art. And then in the end, decided not to pursue post-secondary education after I finished my grade 12. I would just continue to do art and seek out mentors to help me learn a skill that was good enough to make a living from. The most gratifying thing of the whole process is I get to do whatever I want every day. And I don't have anyone telling me what to do. And so if I want to come out here and make boxes, I come and make boxes. If I want to come out here and carve, I'll come out and carve. Learning to do the art has given me the freedom to express myself in ways I never thought I could. And the freedom to make life choices that I never could have made if I was working for someone else. And so, you know, the biggest part of being a self-employed artist is you have the freedom to work or not to work, And if you don't work, you're not going to make a living. So most artists work really hard because you got to work harder for yourself than you do anyone else. One of the aspects of becoming an artist here in Mission is I've been recognized by the Indigenous liaisons in the school system as an artist that they can bring into the schools and pass on cultural practices that I know. Normally it's like drawing sessions and stuff. We're just demonstrating carving skills. What I've found that over the last 10 or 12 years as being a commercial artist is that I've made these connections with these school liaisons and stuff. So they usually get grants every year that's theirs to spend, and they can spend it on art and bring it into the school. So I now have pieces of art at every school here in Mission, and I feel kind of proud of that. I mean, like one of my artist friends that comes and sits with me on Friday says not everybody gets to have the art in public places, and you asked that earlier, and for me I just kind of fell into this, and then all this stuff starts happening. So now I have art in public spaces like schools here in Mission, just about every school. I believe every school in Mission, and some schools in other districts as well, because I do work outside of Mission as well. But now I've retired from that. I found I don't need to do that anymore. I'm just happy to come out here and make boxes. I've had students that I was in the classrooms when they were in grade 4, 5, come to me or see me when they're in grade 12, and they still remember the sessions when I was in there with them. It's pretty cool, actually. You know, you see some little kid that's 7 or 8, and then now they're almost adults, and they're walking around, and they'll stop by the shop and say hello. Yeah. I think most people want to have positive influences on the youth that are around them, and I've had different organizations come to me to bring youth into the studio here just so they can see what I do, and so I can talk to them and maybe pass on some worldly knowledge that they haven't had already. This particular piece is a bent wood canoe box. So the ancestors made these to fit in the bow or stern of the dugout canoes, but you can imagine would have like a V shape, so hence the shape of the box. And without realizing it, the ancestors made a box with compound angles. So very much a challenge to make, even with contemporary tools. One of the reasons for that is you have 3 curve cuts, and they're at different angles. So when you go to bend a box and pull it together, it wants to spiral like a helix and not come together. So we actually have to force it to come together. And because of the compound angles, to this day I've not been able to find a clamp that works on it. And so what I do is I use recycled bicycle tubes cut into strips and then tied together. So I may actually have 6 or 8 bicycle tube strips tied together. So 10 or 12 feet of rubber strapping. And then when I'm ready, after I've custom fit the one joint, so I think I have a nice tight seam, then I'll apply the glue and I'll pull everything together and hold it in place, and then I'll strap it up. And once the straps are on it, you can't see the joint anymore because you're covering the whole box. So it's kind of a hit or miss. If you do it right, if the custom fitting is done, you'll get a nice tight seam down the edge without any gaps. And that's always what we're striving for. Doesn't always happen, but that's what we're looking for. So canoe boxes, because of the compound angles, the fact that you can't use regular clamps, just the nature of the whole thing, they're quite a bit more difficult to make. I would say a much higher failure rate as well. You always try to leave enough material on the bent corners that if it frays, you can sand it clean. So it's kind of a tightrope thing where you make it just thick enough to leave enough material to work with, and thin enough that the wood actually wants to bend. Like most of the boxes that I have in my shop, I'd never held one until I made it. And what drove me to make the canoe box was seeing pictures of them in like Hillary Stewart's cedar. She has pictures and diagrams of different bentwood boxes and the different curve cuts that they made. Doesn't actually show you how to do it, but they have diagrams of it. So just knowing that they existed, knowing that the ancestors made these things without modern technology, just relying on trial and error, as I have done to learn how to make boxes, you know, that's very inspirational and very much set up a challenge for me to see if I could do it. So now I can make these canoe boxes on a regular basis. So we do. What you see here is a flat surface, and what you see here is a flat surface. But when you bend a canoe box, they're at an angle. So the original piece of wood is not flat. The cuts are at an angle. So once I've got the whole thing bent, then I actually have to sand these flat. I have to make this surface flat and the surface on the bottom flat as well, so I can attach a lid and a bottom. Much more difficult. I do enjoy making them. As in most cases, you like making things that are going to bring in more revenue when they're finished. You know, the value of the piece dictates on how many you make and when you make them. They don't sell as often as a regular box, but the revenue it generates is pretty healthy, so we keep making them. I like to make batches. I won't make one, I'll make half a dozen, and then I'll start working at them slowly and surely, finishing them. Yeah, that's the canoe box. I really like making them, and after years of making them, I finally figured out how I could, you know, what you do to end up with a square on top. I know how to do that now. I didn't before. The shapes just came out as they were. If you measure a certain way, you're going to get an elongated box. If you measure another way, you're going to get a square opening. And then the lids are usually shaped and carved from one piece of wood. Nowadays, that piece of wood can be laminated together just to get a solid piece of wood, because it's hard to get bigger pieces of wood now. I no longer work in the mills, so I don't have access to conveyor belts and stuff where things are going to get chipped. That's how I brought a lot of wood home when I was young. But I was just up in Terrace at the Frida Diesling School of Art, where I was talking about bentwood boxes, because that's what I do, and demonstrating. And when I was up there, Dempsey Bob, who's one of the most well-known artists here on the West Coast, he gave me a spoon that he blocked out, and he challenged me. He said, "I want you to finish it." So I'm going to do a collaboration with Dempsey Bob, thanks to him gifting me his spoon, and I'm going to finish it. So yeah, we always aspire to work with the best artists out there. Well, that's how you learn the most. Just being an artist in general has been a revelation to me, because, you know, it's given me a freedom to express myself. I don't think of myself really as just a Squamish artist. I happen to fall into a niche called the West Coast Native Art, where it's pre-established. And as an artist, as an Indigenous artist, I don't have to create a space for myself like a lot of non-Indigenous people do. I just kind of fell into that. And there's so many different varieties of artists in the Indigenous community. We do different things. Some carve canoes, some carve masts, some carve totem poles, some just do panels. And so I just kind of fell into it, and it's been a very satisfying way to make a living. I meet a lot of different people here in the shop. I meet a lot of different people out in the communities. It's brought me back to culture, because I wasn't raised with culture. But when you become an artist, an Indigenous artist, you learn the stories to the pieces that you're going to make. That's part of the teaching. And part of the responsibility then as an artist is to pass on that knowledge to the next generation. And so I like going out into the world and sharing what I know, because there's not very many people who, there's actually quite a few people who make boxes, but there's very few that go out and teach to the general public or indigenous people in schools and stuff how it's done. And it's hard getting knowledge, but if I keep it to myself, it just disappears. So I'm very happy to go out in the world and share what I know. Hopefully raise up other indigenous people who are inspired to make boxes to continue to do so, because that's how it goes. You pass on the knowledge and hopefully it carries on.